So in this segment, we're going to be talking about taxes or borrowing may have to rise again unless ministers use Brexit to turbocharge growth, the CBI chief has warned. And this is probably the biggest pile of rubbish I've ever read from someone who's meant to be in charge of businesses. Like, this guy is an absolute clown, so I'm going to give him the clown mask when I go to make the thumbnail of this, because this man is a clown. So taxes or borrowing could have to rise again unless ministers use Brexit opportunities to turbocharge growth in the economy. And you know what? His solution is slightly different to the other ones. You know, the other ones talk about deregulation and other things. This one's a doozy, people. So ahead of Wednesday's spring term, Tony Danker called on ministers to develop a growth strategy that will allow British companies to outstrip European rivals. Now, how do you intend to do that, Tony? How they don't know what strategy is? You know, when Iron Man came out with the famous statement, "I have a plan of attack," the Tories haven't even gotten that far yet. They're like, what's a strategy? What's a plan? And said ministers were failing to grasp the opportunities arising from Brexit. So let's hear what these phenomenal opportunities are. You know, let's hear this. So let's hear what these phenomenal opportunities are. So Danker urged Rees-Mogg, the Brexit Opportunities Minister, to make use of the economic freedoms that the government now has outside the EU to use state aid to help British companies. He's calling for more socialism, more socialism. You know, the UK always could do state aid. You know, the whole point, like, the EU has rules against state aid, so you don't prop up things like failing companies. That's kind of what I've read into it. I could be wrong on that, but there are, you know, I mean, the French government owns like almost half of EDF. Like, what are you talking about? Like, do you want the government to prop up failing companies? Do you want to use taxpayers' money? Like, what do you want to do here? Especially since the UK is potentially being taken to the WTO by the EU over certain subsidies we are giving to offshore wind energy, because we're trying to favour our own businesses, our own manufacturers above global ones. We are potentially being taken to the WTO over it, because in the contracts they have to use a certain amount of British manufactured parts when that goes against WTO rules, apparently. So the EU are going to take us to court over it, potentially. So, you know, the idea we can use more socialism now outside the EU, we always could have used things like state aid. It's just a lie. You can't really use it to prop up failing companies. Like, this point in Green is just so dumb. Like, this is the person who didn't understand the EU and now is so desperate that he wants the government to step in to help businesses, which I'm not necessarily against. You know, if you set up more facilities so people can be like, okay, look, I want to export this thing to Australia. How do I do that now, given that the tariffs and quotas are going? That's fine. But if you want more socialism and state aid, you're asking the wrong government, pal. You're asking the wrong set of ideologues as well. And in an admission that the CBI had been wrong on part of its approach to Brexit, he admitted the organisation had failed to grasp why sovereignty is important. You can tell what he's trying to do here. He's trying to cozy up to the government, trying to get on, you know, in the meetings and stuff, so he can talk about, oh, you know what would be great if you could do some of that more socialism and really help out some of these British businesses, huh? That's what he's doing. He's trying to worm his way in, and you can see it. It's ugly, to be honest. In an interview with the Chopper's Politics podcast, Danker warned that taxes or borrowing would have to rise again, which both of them are in the process of doing, despite next month's manifesto-busting hike in national insurance contributions, unless ministers prioritise economic growth. Now, there's nothing wrong with trying to prioritise economic growth. It's just the metrics you do it in. That's a problem. If you do it through deregulation, you're going to have problems. He said taxes are on the rise, debt is on the rise, and growth is flatlining, which should be Labour's attack line for the next general election. My big concern for this spring statement and for the whole of economic policy this year is that unless this government works out how to get growth going, we're going to have more incidents like national insurance problems, where of course spending needs to go up, which, you know, the Tories have cut a lot over the last 10 years and privatised other parts, or at least started privatising more anyways. We've got public transportation systems that are nigh on uneconomic. That's predominantly because of a stupid privatised system we have in this country, where companies do rubbish jobs on the trains and with the buses and get away with it because they effectively have monopolies on certain routes. We've got to catch up education to do. We've got catch up on education to do. That doesn't make sense. We've got catch up education to do. Kind of makes sense. We've got health paid for, but let's be honest, not social care yet. And under the Tories, they'll never properly fund social care. There was a man who said we should have a national care system, but he lost last time out. The pressures on public spending are inexorable. I'm not sure how much higher tax can go. I mean, this is the highest tax burden since World War II, which, let's not forget, there was a world war and taxes needed to go up to rebuild the country. So you either borrow more, which I don't think many Tories want to do, which is not necessarily a bad thing so long as you spend it in the right areas, or you grow more, which under the Tories doesn't happen. Mr. Danker said it was morally legitimate for the government to hike national insurance by 1.25%, forcing most families to pay hundreds of pounds more in tax. It's not morally legitimate to put that tax burden onto people who are struggling as is, especially when it's not 1.25%, it's over 10%. Based on the numbers even the Express have shown. So that's a stupid point, especially when in order to help the businesses you represent, you need more people spending money, so taxing them isn't going to help, big man. Do you understand economics? Or are you that desperate to get on the good side of the Tories? Do I think it's morally legitimate for the government to tax more after the pandemic, and what we as businesses should be paying more after the pandemic? Of course, I think there should have been windfall taxes on companies that made lots of profit because of the pandemic. I do, just like I think there should be windfall taxes on energy companies that are making crazy amounts of profit. But our friend here doesn't talk about that. I just don't think the government has done enough post-Brexit. Okay, what do you want them to do? You've talked about more socialism, state aid, that's it. What else do you want them to do? Danker said he wanted a radical discussion about what the idea of Brexit opportunities looks like, which is great because the government don't even know what Brexit opportunities look like. They keep banging on about emerging markets, this, and possible opportunities that, and trade deals with other countries. What are these Brexit opportunities? Because the OBR have said these are negligible. 0.02% at best, minus 0.02% at worst. I think they've even said the US trade deal is only worth 0.16 to the economy, which is insane. By putting services first in trade talks and pledging to grow faster than the European Union, I mean, you can pledge to grow faster, sure. Putting services in trade talks isn't going to really work because services aren't typically covered in free trade agreements. Even the WTO doesn't cover services, it just covers goods. He said, what are the Brexit opportunities? If you ask me, number one, we are actually now are sovereign, and now we are sovereign about an economic strategy to grow faster than the rest of Europe. We could always have had that strategy to grow faster than the rest of Europe. That's fine. You realise that, not all European countries are in the EU, right? We could always have had this strategy. And the point about sovereignty has been debunked so many times. We were a major player in the EU. We were. Number two, we can think about international trade on our terms. We should be thinking about services. Again, this melonhead doesn't realise that services typically aren't discussed in free trade agreements because we are a services-dominated economy. And big man, I guess you didn't read the article in the FT where they talked about services being decimated, especially small-scale ones, where they have to navigate so much red tape and paperwork because each individual EU member state has different rules around essentially third country services. Even if they're allowed to, do they need visas? What are the requirements they need? What are the costs they have to pay? You realise the service economy has been decimated, right? The financial services and other things like events. We've talked about it previously. If this man doesn't have a license to the FT, I'd be very surprised because evidently he's not using it. He continued, I'm not a Brexiteer, but I am a post-Brexiteer. I guess we all are kind of now. I'm interested in what happens now. Brexit is a two-part process. Part one, we leave. Part two, we grow, we flourish. Part two is we crash and burn. The swashbuckling Conservative Enterprise Party, making Britain a high growth country. I'm waiting for that part. That is the bit I signed up for, and just this guy. Again, debunking this, look at the Tories' growth rates under the last 10 years. They've had 2.9% was their highest, and they've averaged lower than 2%, probably around the 1.5% mark without putting the full numbers in. 1.5, 1.7 if you look at Labour. So obviously off the financial crash during the 90s, you got a 5% growth rate, which, okay, we'll nix that. We'll say that's because of the economic crash. But if you go, where is it? 97's here, 3.7%, 98, 99, 3.3, 3.5, 2000, 2.7, 2.2, 3.3, 2.3, and you can see Labour on average do better with the economy. You could say the financial crash, you can blame some of that on Labour, sure, because of the weak regulations, but in terms of COVID, we were hit hardest out of all the other, I think, G7 countries because of our stupid policies we took. We hit around 10%, minus 10% of our GDP. So if you want to blame Labour for the Great Recession, fine, but then you've got to blame the Tories for the minus 10% GDP because of the pandemic. So if you want to take that argument, fine, it's a losing one, you'll die on that hill. But you can see traditionally the Tories are worse with the economy than Labour are. Also, the fact that a lot of this growth goes to the owner class rather than more towards the working class. Labour did massive amounts to help working class people. The Tories simply do not. He says, in a message to Rees-Mogg, he said he wanted the government to use its post-Brexit freedoms to ensure the UK leads the way in renewable energy in places like Humber, which we already could do as an EU member. And in fact, we could get goods manufactured way easier as a member of the EU. We could get more. We had more access to more manufacturing places, so we could build this stuff quicker. So what are you talking about? What are we backing? Are we backing emerging British success stories, he asked, and the government could always have done this but chose not to. He added, I want to see the Brexit Opportunities Minister say, I'm no longer constrained by state aid, which simply isn't true. We are still constrained by state aid. What does this man not understand the WTO? There are WTO rules against state aid. You can be taken to WTO arbitrators over state aid. What do you not understand? I'm going to put government right in the middle of that. Mr. Danker also said the UK called for the UK to develop the smartest, fastest regulations, which... How many buzzwords can you fit into a four-word statement? Fastest and smartest. Honestly. And demonstrated the fleet of foot it showed by the speedy approval of the vaccine when other EU member states were, I think, 2 months behind us. The Americans were quicker than us on certain vaccines. Again, it's just a ludicrous statement, especially since it was an emergency situation. There have been questions over the relations between the government and the CBI, which are still strained due to the business lobby's opposition of Brexit. He said, let's be honest, when populism demands it, businesses will get taken out for a beating. That's what happens from time to time. It was regrettable that when the government is under a bit of pressure, we'll get a bit of a whack. Danker replied, people say the government is anti-business. I mean, Boris Johnson did say F business. So what are you talking about? Saying, I don't believe it is. I do believe this government is quite populist. Being quite populist does not mean it's pro-business, does it? Joker. Especially when you look at the UK exports, we miss the boom from the rest of the world. Other countries, the rest of the world, their trade's going up, ours going down. It's not very good, is it? Yet ministers were betting the shop on the private sector, which the private sector are struggling massively because there aren't enough customs agents to deal with all the new paperwork. Should I say all the Brexit paperwork. They don't have the staff. There aren't the lorry drivers. The private sector can't magic people up, They can't create people in labs. Not yet, anyways. To deliver their plans to create a science superpower, well, that starts with things like education. Especially when Horizon, the UK's membership of Horizon is in doubt, which would massively benefit new sciences and existing science. So again, what are you talking about? Being a science superpower. People, Nobel Prize winners don't want to come to the UK. They just don't, when it comes to the sciences. So again, we're not attracting the world's best scientists. They will be attracted more by the EU, the Americans, even the Canadians and other countries above us because they'll have more access to more facilities. Danker, who became CBI Chief Director General in late 2020, admitted that businesses failed to grasp the importance of sovereignty in the debate over membership of the European Union. Now, what the CBI failed to understand is the way populism was used to convince people to vote against their best interests once again. He said, my reflection on the whole Brexit period is that business people didn't like Brexit, most of them because it was a curtailment of free trade. It did destroy free trade. Surprise, surprise, they didn't like it, right? Which, yes, businesses don't like things that damage their business. Shock. I can't believe it, Jeff. I can't. The political class interpreted that as a grand political act, and they didn't understand that sovereignty was more important. Again, sovereignty wasn't more important. They convinced people we didn't have sovereignty. We couldn't make our own decisions. And now, as Mr. Danker's going to figure out here, with all this newfound sovereignty, which we actually had in the first place, what are the British government going to do with it? Absolutely nothing. Just like they haven't done anything to solve the cost of living crisis. And he says, you know what? They're right. Sovereignty was more important. Then do something then. I've said to the Prime Minister and others, for us it's just a business, but for you it's something bigger. Because they manufactured it as something bigger. That's why. Come on, man. This man's sucking up is so bad. Danker urged the government not to drop his pledge to invest in net zero policies, which are being criticised by some Tory backbenchers. But I thought we were sovereign though. Where's all that sovereignty gone, huh? I'm telling you, all the money is green, which he's probably right on. Things like green bonds are, I think, doing quite well. And the City of London is filled with people looking to deploy their money. And I'm telling you, the European Union is using their COVID resilience fund basically to build green technology. Growth is green, so I highlight it in green. And in a signal that the Tories cannot take their support of businesses for granted, Danker said he was now regularly meeting with Labour leader Keir Starmer and Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, saying we get a chance to comment on their policies, and so I think they're doing the right things that a Labour Party should be doing at this stage in the cycle. So essentially, he's trying to play both sides. Potentially saying, I'm talking to Sir Keir and Rachel Reeves, so maybe I should be still in the room talking to you guys, huh? It's just a joke. This man, phenomenal joke, doesn't understand economics, or at least is pretending to. If I was a member of the CBI and I had a vote to get this guy out, I would get this guy the hell out. You could argue he's doing the right thing for businesses by trying to be in the room and trying to get things done, but he understands very little about the WTO, about the EU, about global trade. Maybe he's playing the fool like some Tories seem to be, or maybe he is a fool, I don't know. But very frustrating. Anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Mr. Danker is not as dank as his name seems to give the image of. Let me know what you think in the comments. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.